It's Connor. You can see Connor O'Reilly. And the date is 1650.
And it's in English.
Yeah. So it means really that it's a great theory about the name and the folklore and all that, but the folklore really, it cannot explain these gravestones. These gravestones are 2 years earlier than the time that the Cromwellians would have been here. And they're typical late medieval gravestones. Late medieval, by that I mean anything from the 15th to the 17th century. You get that type of cross with the Calvary base, the stepped base on it. And if you go out to Ardrahan, for instance, in the graveyard out there, there's scores of them like that.
These have to be fairly well off people.
That's what we thought as well, yeah.
They would have had to been fairly well off. Now the limestone was probably quarried locally. It might have been prized off the karst landscape over anywhere around here. And when you see the blocks of stone that have gone into the walls, it would be quite easy to get limestone locally here. But the interesting thing is that it has Conor O'Reilly, 1650.
R-E-I-L-L-I-E.
Yeah. R-E-I-L-L-I-E. Interestingly, in an awful lot of Irish, an awful lot of spellings of Irish names in English, the E only began to be added into Gaelic names from the 17th or 18th century on. So Kelly, for instance, often didn't have the E earlier on. And of course that was O'Callig earlier on again before that. So what you have on it is the cross, the Calvary cross, the inscription, but you also have these three items here. And this thing, it looks like a blade. It's actually part of a plough. So you have a plough sock and a plough coulter, and then you have a circular item. The circular item is probably the ring that attached the plough. You sometimes see the fittings on the plough were attached by a ring. The other explanation of it is that it could be when a blacksmith was making a wheel, they often used a sunken stone, like a big millstone, with a circular hole in the middle, and they laid out the ribs of the wheel on that, and then they had the rim of the wheel was made, and then they got the metal, band metal, and they heated it, and they pressed it down and secured it onto the rim. And they used one of these big stones with the hole in it, and it's possible that the vocation of the person who was buried there was both a farmer or a blacksmith. So this sort of vocational symbol, as it's called, this becomes very common in the west of Ireland in particular, from late medieval times on. And you get it in County Galway, you get it in Roscommon, Mayo to some degree. In County Clare there are only 4 examples. In County Galway there's nearly 400 examples. So it just depended, as people were getting wealthier, they wanted to use a symbol of their trade. Now, in medieval times you might have used your heraldry. In late medieval times, if you were members of a guild, you might have used your guildsman's mark. But in the 17th and 18th century, people who were becoming middle class and getting slightly wealthier, they wanted to use something else that they were entitled to. So they weren't entitled to heraldry, they weren't a member of a guild, the guilds had died out as a result of the Reformation. So what they began to do was they began to use the symbols of their trade. So you'd have a plough to represent a farmer, or elements of a plough sock, plough coulter for instance, or you might have a hammer and tongs and a horseshoe to represent a blacksmith. But sometimes you might have a bread iron, for instance. You might have out in Turlockmore.
Yeah, that's shears, but they're fairly more recent.
Yeah, in Turlockmore, for instance, you have a lot of gravestones with shears, and you even have the feeding bottles for young lambs.
On a feeding gravestone.
That's right. Yeah,
that's more recent.
Yeah. But that sort of symbolism, ironically, it's beginning to take off again. And people are beginning to use it. They use either a symbol of their interest in sport, a rugby ball or whatever, but I've seen people using surveying equipment on modern gravestones. I've seen a wonderful gravestone to a baker that was erected in 2009 up in Mons de Bois, and there's a lovely sheaths of wheat and a big traditional brown bread carved on the gravestone. So it's coming back again.
Would we be fairly sure that they're in situ since that time, or would they have been moved? Or would you?
I doubt very much if they have
they're
been
there
moved.
from
You know, I think they're where they always were. There's no inscription on it. No.
But could it be broken off maybe?
Well, that's the very part. You know, if you look at it here, where there might have been an inscription. You know.
I know a man that was telling me one time that he nearly cracked one of these that was on a family grave. He was a young man and they were trying to dig a grave in a rural area, only for some person said, "You are not breaking that."
Yeah.
He didn't see anything wrong with it. It's not, I mean, surely when he was older he did a lot of historic work and realised what he nearly did.
Yeah.
Just crack it when it was in the way rather than lift what the older men were wanting to do.
Or people are being told.
He didn't get away with it.
Yeah.
I want to just ask you, were these Catholics before this, say, the Penal times?
Yeah.
The name O'Reilly is a Cavan name.
Yeah.
What were they doing in, we say, Galway?
Yeah.
And how did Cromwell land in Galway? I thought it was to help the Connacht with regard to Cromwell.
Yeah. Well, you see, Cromwell, his army came to Galway in 1652. He himself, you know, every place they'll tell you, oh, Cromwell was here. What they mean is that Archon, his son-in-law, the Cromwellian army was here, not necessarily old Wartface himself, you know. Now, the second thing is, O'Reilly, there are two gravestones that are known only from a list in the of gravestones in the Franciscan cemetery in Galway. And one of them is 17th century. So there must have been other O'Reillys around. The second one is early 18th century. So they were in the Franciscan graveyard. Luckily, before the 1970s, when they took up a lot of the graves in the Franciscan graveyard and put them along the wall, but any of them that happened to be broken, they just covered them over. Luckily, somebody had made a list, but there are two O'Reilly stones there, so there must have been others. So how they came down from Cavan is another thing. Prior to the 17th century, most people would have been Catholic, yes. Now in Galway, what they did was, you have places like, say for instance, St. Nicholas's Collegiate Church. They would have to decide, are we going to allow ourselves to be suppressed, or are we going to take the oath of allegiance? In some cases, they prevaricated for months or maybe years. In some cases what they did was, if there was a piece of iconography on a monument in the church, they defaced it themselves rather than to have it completely destroyed by the iconoclasts that came later on. You know, and they selectively defaced it. They might have removed part of the saints, for instance, or a bit would seem objectionable to the Puritans. So the vast majority of people, yes, in Galway, they would have been Catholic and would have remained Catholic. The O'Reillys may have come with, for instance, the Lynches or the Blakes that had a castle here. At various times throughout the 16th and 17th century, the Blakes and the Lynches, they alternated. The castle was taken from them. We know that the castle was taken from them in the Cromwellian period, and one of the Cromwellians got it for a short while, but gradually, maybe a century later, it came back into the hands of the Blakes. Then it went on then to become the land, become owned by the Wakelands and so on.